My name is Megan Miller. I'm 32, a graphic designer living in Chicago. Today, when my phone vibrated nonstop with 29 missed calls from an unfamiliar number, my heart dropped. Not because of who was calling, but because of where those calls dragged me back to Union Station. 12 years old. Alone. Abandoned. I could still see the polished marble floor beneath my feet, still hear the laughter of the two people who left me behind. My mother's voice, cutting through the chaos of the crowd, let's see how she finds her way home. As if I were some kind of joke. Some twisted experiment. That moment split my life in half. Before Union Station, I believed, even if naively, that parents didn't just leave. After that day, I knew better, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you how I was left to fend for myself in a city I'd never known, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to rise from the ashes of your past, hit subscribe. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about survival, it's a story about reclamation. I grew up in Ridgeview, Pennsylvania. A sleepy town with antique shops, overgrown porches, and holiday parades down Main Street. On the outside, my family looked like a Hallmark postcard. My parents, Frank and Karen Taylor, were model citizens. He ran the biggest hardware store in town, always shaking hands, slapping backs, donating tools to community drives. She owned a bakery famous for her award-winning pies. People adored them. Envied them, even. And then there was us, their two children. Ethan, the golden boy. And me. Jennifer Taylor. No one knew that once our front door closed, that picture-perfect image fell apart. My father, who smiled and joked with customers, became a brooding, unpredictable tyrant after sundown. His drinking started with dinner and escalated as the night wore on. If business was slow or a shipment came in late, we paid the price, not with fists, but with words sharp enough to bleed. My mother didn't stop him. She defended him. He works hard. He's under stress. Don't provoke him. Her version of parenting was compliance. Silence. Submission. If we just acted right, maybe he wouldn't explode. Their favorite phrase was tough love. But what they called strength was just cruelty dressed in discipline's clothes. I remember. Once, when I was 7, I asked for a candy bar at the grocery store. Nothing more. Just a sweet after a long school day. Their response? They left me there for over an hour. Let's see if she learns patience, my mom said when they finally returned, smirking like it was all some harmless prank. A manager had been ready to call the police. I was shaking so badly I couldn't speak, but that was just another lesson. And then there was Ethan. My older brother. Dad's pride. The family MVP. Quarterback. Honor roll. Fishing trips with Frank every other Sunday. When he got an A, it was celebrated. When I got a 97%, I was met with, "Where's the other 3%? Any success I had was minimized. Every failure was magnified. When dinner came out a little late, somehow I was blamed for distracting Mom. If Dad snapped, I'd obviously done something to stress him out. I became the scapegoat for everything that went wrong in their meticulously curated life. One birthday stands out like a scar. I was turning 11. Mom promised a small celebration, just cupcakes and 3 close friends. I helped her bake the night before, bubbling with excitement. But when I woke up the next day, she said, "Change of plans. We're taking you to the amusement park instead." I didn't argue. I was disappointed, sure, but still hopeful. Maybe they wanted to do something special. We drove nearly an hour, parked, and then my parents handed me a $20 bill and said, "Have fun. We'll pick you up at 5. Just like that, they drove off, leaving me at the entrance. No supervision. No map. Just me and $20. I didn't write a single thing. I sat on a bench the entire day, clutching that money like a life vest, watching other kids laugh with parents who actually stayed. 5 o'clock came and went. By the time they returned at 7, I was trembling. "Dad?" He laughed. "Just teaching you to be independent." Mom added, "We had to pick up your cake." There was no cake. No gifts. Nothing. When I cried, they called me dramatic. Spoiled. Weak. This wasn't discipline. This was erasure. I started shrinking inside myself, walking on tiptoes through my own home. I stopped asking for help. I buried everything in sketchbooks. Drawing became my lifeline. In my pencil worlds, people were kind. Families didn't abandon each other, and then came the day before everything changed forever. I had just received my report card. Straight A's, except for one, an A- in science. I was proud. For a second, I thought maybe this time, they'd be proud too. Dad snatched the paper and barked, "A-? What's wrong with you?" Ethan never got less than an A. Mom chimed in, "We're not raising quitters." That night, I heard them whispering in the kitchen. "She's too soft," Dad muttered. She needs something real, Mom answered, and the next morning, they suggested a day trip to Chicago. Just the three of us. Ethan couldn't come. Football practice. This would be special. Just me, Mom, and Dad. I didn't trust it, not fully. But some small part of me still hoped this was an attempt at bonding. Maybe even an apology. I had no idea I was walking straight into the moment that would destroy everything. We left early, the mood oddly light. Dad cracked jokes. Mom hummed. While packing lunch. They quizzed me on state capitals during the drive. If I got one wrong, Dad would click his tongue and scoff. Even a third grader knows that. Still, I clung to the idea that this could be normal. By the time we parked outside Union Station, I was holding my breath. The crowd inside buzzed like a hive, businessmen, tourists, commuters rushing in every direction. The scale of it was terrifying. Wait here, Mom said, pointing to one of the marble columns. We're just moving the car and grabbing lunch. I'll come, I offered. You're not a baby, Dad laughed. You're 12. You'll be fine. I watched them walk away, and they never came back. The moment their backs disappeared into the swarm of strangers, I felt it, something cold and sharp threading through my chest. At first, I kept glancing at the entrance, expecting them to reappear. With greasy fast food bags or maybe drinks in hand. 15 minutes ticked by. Then 20. Still no sign. I tried convincing myself that traffic or a long line must have delayed them. But that hope dissolved as the station clock struck 1. My stomach churned. I gripped the smooth stone of the pillar like it was an anchor, refusing to drift into panic. Half an hour became a full hour. That's when I realized something was deeply wrong. I dug into my jacket pocket. 7 crumpled dollars. No phone. No ID. I didn't even have a map. All I had was a growing sense of dread and a mental loop screaming, this isn't a prank. They're not coming back. By the second hour, tears clung to my eyelashes. I kept scanning the crowd, hoping, praying, someone might look familiar. But every face was that of a stranger in a hurry. I was 12. Alone. And 3 hours away from the only home I had ever known, with no clue how to get back there. Then I saw it, through the tall windows across the station's grand hall. Their car, our navy blue Ford Taurus, rolled past. My heart leapt. Maybe they'd gotten confused about where to meet. I bolted toward the exit, nearly slipping on the polished floor, waving both arms like a windmill. The car slowed. I could see Dad behind the wheel, smirking. And Mom? She rolled down the passenger window and shouted 5 words that would splinter. My world, let's see you find home. They laughed. They waved. And then they drove away. No hesitation. No turning around. Just fading into Chicago traffic, like leaving their daughter in a massive train station was some twisted challenge. The blood drained from my face. My knees buckled. I staggered back inside, gulping air like I was drowning. My entire body trembled. Not from the cold, but from the brutal clarity of what had just happened. They didn't forget me. They didn't get lost. They left me on purpose. For the next hour, I wandered in a haze. I walked circles around the grand hall, desperate for anything familiar. Each time I passed a uniformed worker, I debated whether to speak. But their warnings echoed in my head, don't talk to strangers. Cops take bad kids away. So I didn't ask for help. Not yet. Instead, I counted the coins in my pocket over and over. I tried to stay still. I tried not to cry. I failed. It was after 3 p.m. when someone noticed. An older woman with salt and pepper hair and crimson-framed glasses. She wore a station vest and a name tag that read, Janet. She crouched beside me, gentle voice breaking through my terror. Sweetheart, are you lost? I shook my head out of instinct. She gave a soft laugh. You've passed this bench 4 times in the last half hour. Want to tell me what's going on? They went to move the car, I mumbled. When? I looked down. 3 hours ago. Janet's smile vanished. She helped me up and guided me behind the customer service desk. Offered me water. Told me it was okay to cry, and when I did, I couldn't stop. The story spilled out in broken pieces. My parents. The drive. The excuse. The laughter as they left. Her expression shifted from concern to horror. You're Jennifer Taylor? She asked after jotting down my answers. I nodded, still shaking. She alerted security. A kind man named Marcus stepped in next. He took notes, asked for my home address and any numbers I could remember. I recited them from memory like prayers. He made calls. Quiet conversations happened behind frosted glass doors. Words like child welfare and abandonment floated through the air. By 4:45 p.m., I was seated across from a Chicago police officer named Teresa Ramirez. Her uniform was neatly pressed. Her voice, calm and serious. The walls of her small station office felt too tall, too gray. She handed me hot cocoa in a foam cup. We tried calling your home number. No answer, she said after reading my statement. They're still driving, I whispered, hoping, lying, she didn't correct me. But the look in her eyes told the truth. They're not coming back. Within the hour, a woman from Child Services entered the room. Laura Donovan. Curly brown hair. A worn leather satchel. She introduced herself softly, then opened a folder with my name on the tab. We need to find you somewhere to stay for the night, she explained. Foster care? I asked. Yes, temporarily. Just until we sort things out. The words foster care stung. I had heard enough stories to imagine a dozen nightmare scenarios. But she assured me, we have a kind family available. You'll be safe there. That night, I was welcomed into a stranger's house like a package dropped at the door. Diane and Robert Williams greeted me at their kitchen table, their daughter Alicia handing me spare pajamas and an unopened toothbrush. They tried to be warm. I tried not to cry again. Sleep never came. I stared at the ceiling of a room that smelled like lavender and unfamiliar furniture polish, silently replaying the moment I saw my parents drive away. What did I do wrong? What lesson was I supposed to learn? Why wasn't I worth turning around for? Morning arrived with no answers. I ate dry toast, nodded through conversation, and waited. Around 10 a.m., Laura returned. She looked tired. We reached your parents last night, she said gently. I sat up straight. Are they coming to get me? A pause. No, my stomach sank. They claim this was intended as a teaching moment. They say you were supposed to figure things out on your own. They left me in a city I'd never seen before, I said flatly. No phone. No map. No money. They insist it was temporary. That they were going to check on you. But once the authorities got involved, things got complicated. I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. Complicated? That's what they called it? They'll be attending a meeting with us tomorrow, she added. You don't have to speak to them if you don't want to. I didn't reply. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. All I knew was this: my parents didn't lose me. They threw me away. The next 24 hours passed like fog, quiet, disjointed, unreal. I sat in the Williams living room, wrapped in a soft blanket that smelled like dryer sheets and cinnamon candles. Alicia offered me puzzles and movies, but I couldn't focus. Diane suggested baking together. Robert invited me to help water their small backyard garden. I went through the motions with a hollow kind of politeness. At dinner, I spilled juice across the table. I froze, expecting fury. But Diane only smiled and handed me a napkin. No big deal. It's just a little mess. The absence of yelling was more unsettling than comforting. Monday afternoon came too quickly. Laura picked me up in her beige sedan, explaining everything again as we drove downtown. She said I could stay silent during the meeting. That I wouldn't be alone. But my hands still shook in my lap. The DCFS office was housed in a gray concrete building with buzzing lights. And too many chairs. We walked down a long hallway and entered a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. A long table stretched across the space, already occupied by Laura's supervisor and a liaison from family court. 5 minutes later, the door opened again, and there they were, Frank and Karen Taylor. My parents. My former parents. They didn't look how I remembered. Dad seemed drained, his skin pale, shoulders hunched. Mom's eyeliner smudged slightly beneath her red-rimmed eyes. But still, she wore pearls. Still clung to appearances. Behind them stood a man in a suit, clutching a briefcase, their lawyer. Mom opened her mouth. Jennifer, I flinched. Laura stepped between us. Let's keep this civil, please. Everyone took their seats. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my young life. Their attorney began outlining their version of events. It was a life skills exercise, he said. A structured opportunity for their daughter to develop independence. They claimed they had returned after 20 minutes and, unable to find me, assumed I had found help on my own. They believed I'd end up contacting them once I solved the problem. This was intended as a growth moment, Frank said, looking directly at the judge's representative. She's a bright girl, Karen added. We thought she'd rise to the occasion. The room fell silent. You left a child in a major metropolitan train station, with no way to call, no money, and no idea how to get home, the liaison responded, her voice clipped with disbelief. She had some money, Mom muttered. $7, I finally spoke. That's all I had. The lawyer attempted to pivot. There are payphones everywhere. She's 12, the liaison cut in. This wasn't discipline. This was neglect. I stared at the faces of the people who raised me, watching them justify abandonment like it was just another misunderstood decision. They didn't apologize. Not once. When asked if I wanted to return home, my voice was clear. No, my answer shocked them. Dad's jaw clenched. Don't be ridiculous. You're our daughter. Not anymore, I whispered. The liaison clarified. Jennifer will remain in temporary placement while the court investigates this matter. Mom looked ready to protest, but the judge's representative silenced her with a hand gesture. Karen's next attempt felt like a punch to the gut. She stood and tried to reach for me. Sweetheart, you're blowing this out of proportion. I learned something from you, I interrupted, rising from my chair. You don't teach loyalty by betrayal. And you don't build strength through cruelty. I'm not the one who failed here. I walked out of the room with Laura by my side, heart racing, knees trembling, but upright, and I didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of court dates, therapy appointments, and social work evaluations. The Williams household remained my refuge, warm, quiet, steady. But I always knew it wasn't permanent, until one Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted. Laura walked into the kitchen holding a thick manila envelope and said, "Megan, I want you to meet someone." I turned to find a couple standing behind her. Early 40s. The woman had kind eyes and a stethoscope peeking from her pocket. The man wore paint on his fingers and a soft expression. "This is Sarah and Thomas Miller," Laura said. "They've fostered for over a decade. No biological children. They'd like to welcome you, if you're willing." I didn't respond at first. Too many promises had been broken already. Too many smiles had turned into sneers. Thomas spoke up. "You don't have to talk about anything until you're ready." Sarah nodded. "Our home is yours for as long as you need it. No pressure. Just possibilities." There was something calm in their presence. Steady, without trying too hard. That night, I packed again. This time, I wasn't scared. The Miller's house sat on a quiet street in Evanston, framed by tall maple trees and a neatly kept garden that smelled like rosemary and wet earth. Compared to Ridgeview's chaotic energy, their home felt like stepping into a painting. Muted colors, gentle corners, nothing too loud, nothing waiting to explode. Thomas carried my duffel bag to the room they'd prepared. Pale yellow walls. A soft mattress. A window seat overlooking hydrangeas. Bookshelves that stood empty, waiting. "You can fill it however you like," Sarah smiled. "Posters, journals, artwork. We want you to feel like this space belongs to you." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't believe her, because I wanted to. I dropped my bag beside the dresser and stood still. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating the mood in the room. I wasn't bracing for a raised voice or sharp sarcasm. It was quiet. Still. Almost too still. Later that evening, over spaghetti, Thomas passed me a napkin. "Any food allergies?" I shook my head. A minute later, my fork slipped and the plate clattered, red sauce splashing across the tablecloth. My whole body tensed. Breath caught in my throat. I waited for scolding. Mockery. The reminder that I can't do anything right. Instead, Sarah calmly reached for a dishcloth and dabbed at the mess. "Happens to all of us," she said. "Especially when it smells this good." That moment undid me more than any kindness ever had. Trust wasn't instant. Years of surviving in a household of emotional landmines had left scars. I stayed on edge, scanning for the cracks in their kindness. The shift. The lie behind the smile, but it never came. When I asked what the rules were, Thomas replied, "Respect each other. Help out when you can. Keep us in the loop about where you are. The rest we'll figure out together. No rigid expectations. No impossible standards, just grace." In therapy, Dr. Reynolds began unpacking the trauma piece by piece. Words like neglect, emotional deprivation, complex PTSD entered the conversation. At first, I resisted the language. It felt too clinical. Too distant. But slowly, I understood. What they had done wasn't strict parenting. It was deliberate harm wrapped in smiles and excuses. "You didn't deserve any of it," she told me repeatedly. "Your worth was never dependent on their approval." I wanted to believe that. More than anything. 3 months into living with the Millers, something unexpected happened. Ethan reached out. He came to the house one Saturday afternoon. Taller than I remembered, but less confident. No longer the golden boy of Ridgeview. He stood in the entryway holding a small gift bag and an apology in his eyes. "They miss you," he began. I crossed my arms. "Do they?" I asked. "In their way," he admitted. "Are they sorry?" Ethan hesitated. "They're sorry you're gone. But I don't think they understand why it happened." "And you?" I asked pointedly. His face dropped. "I should have stood up for you. I knew they treated you differently. I was a coward." Honesty. That was new. We sat in the Millers' living room, an awkward silence hanging between us. Sarah moved through the kitchen in the background, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give us space. "I'm glad you're okay," he said before leaving. It wasn't a resolution. But it was a start point. 6 months after Union Station, I stood before a judge in a family court hearing. After reviewing psychological reports, my own statement, and evaluations of my birth parents, the court gave them 2 options: complete a 2-year rehabilitation program with no guarantee of custody, or surrender their parental rights. They didn't hesitate. "We refuse to be punished for trying to raise a strong daughter," Frank declared to the court, and just like that, they were no longer legally my guardians. 3 months later, on my 13th birthday, the Millers sat me down with a question: would you like to become our daughter? Sarah asked. No dramatic speeches. No pressure. Just quiet hope in her voice. Yes, I said without blinking. I changed my name from Jennifer Taylor to Megan Miller. A new name. A new chapter. One I had chosen. You'll always be whoever you want to be here, Sarah told me as we finalized the paperwork. We just feel lucky to walk beside you. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed that. Someone meant those words. The day the adoption became official, I stood outside the courthouse in a dress Sarah helped me pick, holding a folder with my new legal name printed in bold letters: Megan Elise Miller, not Jennifer. Not Taylor, Megan. A name I chose. A name that no longer carried bruises. Thomas squeezed my shoulder as the photographer snapped a picture. You did this, he said. You built this life. I smiled, not because the camera asked me to, but because I finally wanted to. The transition from survival to stability wasn't sudden. It happened in chapters, in small acts of trust earned rather than expected. Every night spent under the Millers' roof, every dinner that ended without raised voices, every morning that began without dread, it all helped repair what had been shattered. But the most powerful healing came through art. Thomas, who taught at a local high school, noticed the stack of sketchbooks I carried like armor. He never asked what the drawings meant. He simply left fresh supplies on my desk. Blank pages. Charcoal sticks. Watercolors. Pencils in every shade. Create whatever you need, he told me once. Even if it never sees the light. So I did. My early sketches were dark, full of tangled shapes and broken faces. But as time passed, I found color. Movement. Story. Pages that once bled trauma now held glimpses of possibility. Art gave me permission to process what I couldn't yet say aloud. In school, I remained quiet, observing more than speaking. Trusting classmates took effort. Letting anyone near my inner world felt risky. But then I found the art room. And inside it, others who understood the language of line and shade and shadow. We spoke through brush strokes and shared supplies. Slowly forming a tribe without needing to share our histories. Senior year, I knew where I was headed. The School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Ambitious? Yes. But for the first time in my life, ambition felt allowed. We'll figure out the finances, Sarah promised. We believe in you. Thomas framed my acceptance letter. He even cried when the envelope arrived, though he denied it completely. That August, I packed for college. Not to escape, but to expand. Sarah labeled everything meticulously. Thomas made sure I had extra sketch pads. Scout, the Miller's shaggy dog, pawed at my suitcase, sensing a shift. On move-in day, Sarah hugged me a little too long. Call. If you need anything. Or nothing. Or everything. I will, I whispered. Chicago greeted me with chaos. Buses. Crowds. Canvas bags. Professors who spoke like art could bend reality. Students who wore neon lipstick and painted jackets. My roommate had lavender hair and 2 nose rings. It was thrilling. And terrifying. For months, I kept to myself, hiding behind assignments and familiar routines. I excelled in class but avoided connection. I didn't know how to share space, not really. Then came color theory. And Audrey, she was everything I wasn't: bold, loud, unfiltered. She painted like her hands were on fire. One afternoon, she looked at my work and said, "You're the most careful artist I've ever met." Is that bad? I asked. No, she shrugged. But I wonder what would happen if you stopped holding back. That question lingered. Audrey became my first real friend. She didn't push, but she didn't retreat either. We shared meals, swapped critiques, stayed up too late discussing brushes and heartbreak. One night, while finishing a group project, I told her the short version of my past. She listened. No shock. No pity. Just presence. They screwed up, she said simply. Big time. But you? You built something from ashes. With her support, I considered dating for the first time. Enter Brian. A photography major with warm eyes and a laugh. That felt like sunrise. Our first conversation happened in a critique class when he complimented my typography. You make fonts look like emotion, he said. It wasn't a line. He meant it. Our first date was quiet, coffee in a hidden cafe. 5 hours of uninterrupted conversation. I told him I'd been adopted as a teen. He didn't ask for details. Just nodded. Family's complicated, he said. I care more about who you are now. He never pressured me. Not once. The first time he reached for my hand, I flinched. Reflex. Years of tension hardwired into my nervous system. He didn't make a big deal of it. Just smiled and gave me space. The next time, I didn't pull away. By junior year, Brian and I were inseparable. He learned when to lean in, when to wait, and how to hold silence without discomfort. With him, I didn't feel like damaged goods. I felt like someone with layers, none of which made me less worthy. Doctor. Reynolds once told me that relationships after trauma don't need to be perfect. They just need to be patient. Brian was that, and more. His senior year arrived like a wave. Graduation loomed. Real life pressed at the edges. Thanks to a professor's referral, I landed an interview at Element Design, a branding firm focused on nonprofits. Their mission aligned with everything I cared about: storytelling, impact, visual integrity. "We like your portfolio," the creative director told me. "But what we really see in you is depth." Depth. A word I had earned. I got the job, and 2 weeks after graduation, I moved into a studio apartment with a leaky faucet, mismatched chairs, and a wall entirely dedicated to art I had collected. Over the years. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. The scared child from Union Station no longer ruled my world. She still whispered, still surfaced during storms, but I no longer let her steer. That power now belonged to me. My first day at Element Design felt like walking into a future I hadn't dared to picture. Exposed brick walls. Wide windows that spilled morning light across long communal tables. Soft chatter, bold color palettes pinned to corkboards, and colleagues who introduced themselves with warmth instead of wary eyes. My desk sat near the corner window. A simple setup, just a monitor, notebook, and a potted snake plant someone had left behind. I touched the desk like I was checking if it was real. My supervisor, Nadia, carried herself with effortless confidence. She wore sharp blazers and always had a sketch tucked under her arm. The first time I presented a campaign concept, I stumbled over my words, second-guessing every slide. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "Your visuals speak louder than your voice. Let them. The rest will follow." That stuck with me. Bit by bit, I grew into the role. I learned to pitch without shrinking, to defend my designs without apology. Each client meeting added another layer of self-belief. Within 2 years, I was leading projects solo. Outside work, life unfolded gently. Brian and I found a rhythm. Shared grocery lists, movie nights, spontaneous weekend hikes. He met Thomas and Sarah over a Sunday brunch where Sarah insisted on baking cinnamon rolls from scratch, because store-bought ones lack soul. They adored him instantly. One fall evening, while we were visiting my adoptive parents, Brian pulled me aside after dinner. His fingers trembled slightly. "I want to ask you something." I blinked, unsure. "Not just you," he added. "Thomas. Sarah. I'd like to ask them too." My heart caught in my throat. 3 months later, on a soft April morning, we stood beneath a canopy of wisteria in a garden behind a small chapel. Audrey stood beside me in a navy suit with gold buttons, grinning like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Thomas walked me down the aisle, his eyes glassy. "You've built something beautiful," Sarah whispered during our mother-daughter dance. "We built it together," I answered. It was perfect, but even perfect moments can be interrupted. The message arrived 6 months after the wedding, buried among junk emails and subscription newsletters. Subject line: "Jennifer, it's Mom. Please call." I stared at it for hours, unopened. Unread. Then came a voicemail. Unknown number. Pennsylvania area code. My stomach twisted. I let it ring out, then pressed play. "Jennifer, or Megan, I guess. It's Ethan. I know it's been years, but something's happened. Dad had a heart attack last night. He's in critical condition. They're not sure if he's going to make it. I thought you should know." The message ended without pleasantries. I sat in silence. Scout, our one-eyed rescue mutt, placed his head on my knee. The kitchen around me blurred. The walls felt too close. My chest tightened. 20 years of silence ripped open in one sentence. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message: "Please read. It's about your father." I closed it. I called Dr. Reynolds instead. "Why now?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because trauma never asks permission," she answered. I cried in her office for the first time in years. Not from sorrow, but from the disorientation of old wounds resurfacing without warning. "Do I have to respond?" I asked. "No," she said firmly. "You don't owe anyone anything. But that doesn't mean you can't choose to." I left her office carrying more than my purse. I carried a decision, and back home, Brian found me scrolling through medical research. Heart attacks. Recovery statistics. Surgical risks. "I just need to understand what's real," I explained. "Whether this is about closure or control." He sat beside me without speaking. Just held my hand. That night, I wrote a single text: "This is Megan. I received your message. What do you expect from me?" Ethan's reply came 10 minutes later. "Nothing. Just thought you should know. He's stable for now. Triple bypass scheduled tomorrow. We understand if you want no part of this." The honesty stunned me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I went for a walk with Scout, winding through quiet streets until the moon hung low over the rooftops. I stood beneath a streetlight and asked myself the one question that mattered: do I need to see them, or do I need to see who I've become without them? The next morning, I texted Ethan again: "I'll meet with you." Just you. Neutral location. Tomorrow. Not as a daughter.asa witness to how far I'd come. Ethan chose a quiet cafe halfway between our cities, neutral ground, nothing too personal. A place where baristas wore aprons that smelled like cinnamon, and soft jazz buzzed low through ceiling speakers. I arrived 5 minutes early and waited with my back to the entrance, nursing a lukewarm chamomile tea that did nothing to calm the storm inside me. When he stepped in, I recognized him instantly despite the 20-year gap. The golden boy of my childhood had faded into an ordinary man, slightly balding, hunched shoulders, eyes that avoided direct contact. He wore khakis and a wrinkled blue button-down shirt like he'd dressed in the dark. "Megan," he said, approaching cautiously, as if I might vanish. "Thank you for coming." I nodded without smiling, unsure how to bridge decades of silence. He sat across from me, folding his hands on the table like a student about to give a confession. "You look amazing," he tried, but I wasn't there for compliments. "Tell me about Frank," I said, refusing to call him Dad. Ethan sighed, relieved to jump into facts instead of feelings. The surgery had gone well, 3 blocked arteries cleared, but complications lingered. He was conscious but weak. "He's lucky to be alive," Ethan admitted. "High blood pressure. Too much alcohol. Poor diet. They never changed much after you left." My brows lifted slightly. "And Mom?" He hesitated, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. "Still holding everything together on the outside. But inside? She's unraveling. They've been together over 45 years, for better or worse. Mostly worse, I guess." His tone wasn't bitter, it was exhausted. I studied his face, wondering if he'd ever truly seen them for who they were. "Are you close with them?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Yes and no," he replied. "I visit once a month, more out of duty than anything. Nancy, my wife, can't stand them. So I keep things surface level. Polite. Distant." He paused. "After you disappeared, things shifted. Or maybe I just started seeing clearly." I narrowed my gaze. "What did they tell people about me?" His jaw tightened. "At first, they said you'd gone to live with family friends in Chicago. For education. Opportunities. Later, the story became that you'd cut ties, grown rebellious, shut them out for no reason. They spun it like they were victims." My stomach flipped. "And you let them?" He looked down, ashamed. I was 18. About to start college. It was easier to believe their version than confront the truth. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He was already drowning in his own regret. "I'm not proud of it," he added quietly. "But after Emma was born, my daughter, I saw everything differently. She's 12 now. The same age you were, then." He swallowed hard. "The idea of doing that to her? It makes me sick." The silence that followed was thick and hard to breathe through. After a moment, I asked the question I'd carried like a stone in my chest. "Do they feel remorse? Real remorse?" Ethan's eyes flicked toward the window. "Frank, when he's drinking, sometimes says he went too far. That he wishes things had been different." "Karen," she struggles. Still defensive. "But they ask about you. They keep a framed photo of you on the mantle. Your 8th grade school picture. The one before Chicago." A strange chill crawled up my spine. The idea of my younger self frozen in their living room like a ghost felt grotesque. "Why now?" I asked, gripping the edge of the table. "Why reach out after all this time?" Ethan was honest. "Partly because Frank might not make it. But mostly because I realized I couldn't keep pretending. I needed to know if there was still a chance to make things right. Even just between us." His words carried no pressure, only hope. And surprisingly, I didn't hate him for it. We spent 2 hours trading fragments of the last 2 decades. He told me about accounting, fatherhood, Nancy's sharp wit, and their small backyard garden where they grew tomatoes. I told him about Brian, Scout, and Miller Creative. I didn't share details about therapy or panic attacks. But I didn't lie either. "You turned your pain into something remarkable," he said, genuinely awed. "I didn't think anyone could survive what they did, let alone build something so strong." I didn't respond with pride. I didn't know how. But I appreciated the sentiment. Eventually, he asked the question he'd clearly been circling since I sat down. "Would you consider visiting him?" His voice was almost apologetic. "You don't have to speak. He might be asleep. I can make sure Karen isn't there." I looked out the window at the street beyond. Cars passed. Trees swayed. Life continued, indifferent to our family history. "I'll think about it," I said at last. And for the first time, I meant it. When we parted, Ethan offered his hand. I took it. Briefly. It was strange to touch someone who once watched me vanish from our family and said nothing. But it was also the hand of a man trying, perhaps too late, to reach across the abyss. That evening, I told Brian everything. Every word. Every hesitation. He listened like always, quiet, steady, safe. If you decide to go, he said softly, just remember, you're not that little girl anymore. You're the one with the power now. You decide how this ends. I nodded, but my stomach was already twisting. The next morning, I called Dr. Reynolds and asked if she would come with me. Not as my therapist. Just as a witness. A steady presence. A reminder that I wasn't walking back into my past, I was walking straight through it, as the woman I had fought to become. The hallway leading to the cardiac ICU was long, sterile, and far too quiet. Each footstep echoed like a question I hadn't yet answered. Beside me, Dr. Reynolds walked in calm silence, her presence an anchor, reminding me with every breath that I wasn't that trembling girl stranded in Union Station anymore. I had grown, healed, and rebuilt, but that didn't mean I wasn't afraid. Every fluorescent light we passed buzzed faintly overhead. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a scent I knew would cling to my clothes long after I left. As we approached the secured double doors, Ethan was already waiting, shoulders hunched, nervous energy spilling from his every movement. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice low. "He's awake but groggy. Physical therapy drained him." I nodded, expression unreadable. "Karen?" "In the cafeteria," he replied quickly. "She won't be back for at least half an hour." I told her I needed privacy to go over insurance documents. She didn't question it. His discomfort with the lie was obvious, but I didn't address it. My focus was fixed ahead. He gestured for us to follow, and moments later, we turned a corner and stopped outside room 214. "Just prepare yourself," Ethan murmured. "He doesn't look the same." I braced as the door opened. Inside, surrounded by machines that beeped softly in sync with his fragile heartbeat, lay a man who once loomed like a monster in my memory. Now he was pale, deflated, buried beneath tubes and wires, with a breathing cannula threaded beneath his nose. His chest, once wide and intimidating, rose and fell shallowly beneath a faded hospital gown. His skin looked almost translucent. For a second, I didn't recognize him. The legend of my trauma had aged. Diminished. Shriveled under the weight of time and consequence. His eyes opened slowly as our footsteps stirred the silence, and when he saw me, confusion flickered, followed by shock. "Jennifer?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "It's Megan now," I answered flatly, stopping just inside the threshold. "Megan," he repeated slowly, as if the syllables burned his tongue. "You came." I didn't approach. I kept my arms folded across my chest, shielding the parts of myself still vulnerable to his memory. "Why did you want to see me?" I asked, voice calm, emotion tucked far beneath my ribs. "You're still my daughter," he murmured, eyes blinking against the overhead light. "No," I corrected. "I was. Until the day you watched me chase your car from behind a pillar in Union Station. That's when you ended that." He winced, a physical recoil that made the monitors twitch. "We made a mistake," he whispered. "A terrible one." I shook my head slowly. "Mistakes are accidents. Forgetting a birthday. Missing a pickup. What you did was deliberate. Premeditated. Cruelty wrapped in a lesson." My words sliced, but I refused to flinch. This was not revenge. This was truth, spoken plainly and finally. Dr. Reynolds stood just behind me, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this confrontation. Ethan lingered in the corner, quiet, pale, unsure of his place in this reunion that had no softness left in it. "I've had a lot of time to reflect," Frank continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Especially since this." He gestured weakly toward the IVs and heart monitor. "When you realize you might not have much time left, things become clearer." "And what exactly have you realized?" I asked. "That I failed you. That we failed you. That we let our ideas of toughness destroy the one thing that mattered most." It was the closest thing to an apology he'd ever offered, but it didn't touch the cold knot at the base of my spine. Because remorse without accountability was just another manipulation. Before I could respond, movement behind me drew my attention. The door creaked, and in stepped Karen Taylor, holding a lukewarm cup of hospital coffee and a paper bag. Her eyes widened as she froze mid-step. "Jennifer," she gasped. "It's Megan," Ethan said quickly, stepping between us slightly. Her gaze locked on mine, horror and desperation mingling across her carefully made-up face. Despite the setting, she wore eyeliner and a structured cardigan. Appearances mattered to her, even now. "I didn't expect," she began, stepping forward, arms lifting instinctively as if I would welcome a hug. I stepped back, and she stopped mid-motion, hands trembling before falling to her sides. "You're so beautiful," she whispered. "You look just like Sarah Miller," I interrupted. "My mother." Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged, the silence stretched, brittle as glass. I've thought about you every day, she managed finally. Wondered where you were. If you were safe. If you ever forgave us. You didn't check on me for 20 years, I replied. Not when I moved. Not when I changed my name. Not after the adoption. Nothing. We didn't know how to reach you, she whispered. You never tried, I snapped. Because that would have required admitting you were wrong. Frank stirred behind me, his voice raspier than before. Karen, let her speak. Her eyes welled with tears. We never stopped loving you. We didn't know what else to do. Then you shouldn't have been parents, I replied. Because good parents don't leave a child in a strange city as punishment. Good parents don't vanish while laughing from behind a windshield. Good parents don't choose pride over their child's safety. The words spilled, unfiltered, untouched by diplomacy, she flinched. Her coffee cup trembled. We were trying to teach you something, she whispered. To prepare you for the world. You prepared me, I said. You prepared me to expect abandonment. To question every act of kindness. To believe I was unworthy of love unless I earned it by being perfect, silent, invisible. Dr. Reynolds placed a gentle hand on my arm. I steadied myself. I didn't come here for your apologies. Or your tears. I came to face you. To see for myself that the people who haunted my childhood are just human. Flawed. Aging. Ordinary. Karen took a step forward. Is there any chance? No, I cut her off. There's no room for reconciliation. That window closed the day you drove away. What I can offer you is clarity. I have a life now. A husband. A career. A family that chose me. I am not your daughter. I am Megan Miller. And that will never change. Frank closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his temple. Karen finally sat beside his bed, shaking with quiet sobs. We understand, he said at last. We don't deserve your forgiveness. I turned toward the door, Dr. Reynolds following. Forgiveness isn't owed, I said without looking back. It's earned. And you surrendered that the day you let the rearview mirror become your last image of me. Outside the hospital, the air felt crisper, the light more honest. I exhaled slowly, for the first time in years, feeling lighter, not because the past was erased, but because it had been faced. The power they once held over me had finally been returned to its rightful owner, me. The ride home from the hospital was silent, but not uncomfortable. Dr. Reynolds didn't press with questions or observations. She knew I needed space to let everything settle. I stared out the window, watching unfamiliar neighborhoods slide by, brick buildings, overgrown lawns, empty sidewalks, and thought about how strange it was that closure didn't come with fireworks or final speeches. It came quietly. In the form of two people, once giants in my life, now reduced to pale regret and trembling hands. I wasn't sure what I expected when I walked into that hospital room. Maybe I had imagined defiance. Deflection. The same dismissive pride that had fueled them for decades. But instead, I saw something I never anticipated: smallness. They looked like people who'd spent 2 decades convincing themselves they were right, only to be brought face to face with the aftermath of their own choices. And it didn't make me feel triumphant. It made me feel free. Over the following days, I returned to my normal routine, but nothing felt quite the same. I worked through client briefs at Miller Creative with a sharper focus, slept more deeply than I had in months, and let silence sit in rooms without needing to fill it. I spoke to Dr. Reynolds 3 times that week, unpacking every word, every expression, every moment of hesitation from the hospital visit. She reminded me that healing is nonlinear. That some closures sting more than they soothe. But what stood out most was her observation that I had taken the narrative back. You're no longer waiting for them to say the right thing, she told me. You've said it for yourself. That truth settled deep in my bones. Ethan sent a few updates, short, respectful texts. Frank had stabilized. Karen was overwhelmed. I didn't respond right away. I appreciated his boundaries and the fact that he never pushed, never guilt, never begged for reconnection. When I finally replied, I kept it brief: thanks for the update. I appreciate your respect for my space. His answer came within seconds, always. But even with that peace, not everything stayed quiet. Karen, unsurprisingly, couldn't resist. The woman who once orchestrated my abandonment now began flooding every channel she could find. Emails, Facebook requests, voicemails from different area codes. They all carried the same message cloaked in different words: please talk to us. Please let us try again. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. The moment in that hospital room had been enough. I'd said everything I needed to say. I had nothing more to give them. Eventually, I blocked every number, every email, every social account. It wasn't out of spite, it was survival. Protecting the boundaries I'd fought so hard to build wasn't cruelty. It was courage. 1 week later, I stood in my studio, sunlight warming the hardwood floor, and picked up the framed photo of Thomas and Sarah taken on their anniversary trip to Maine. Behind me, Scout snored quietly on his favorite pillow. That night, I called Sarah. When she answered, I didn't speak right away. I just listened to the familiar rhythm of her breath on the other end. Megan? She asked softly. Thank you, I said, voice thick with emotion. For what, sweetheart? For never giving up on me. For showing me what love actually looks like. Oh, honey, she replied, her voice catching. You gave us just as much. You taught us how to parent again, how to trust again. We're so proud of you. The call ended with quiet laughter and promises to visit next weekend. When I hung up, I sat alone for a while and let the quiet wash over me like a tide, rinsing away residue that had clung for far too long. That evening, Brian and I walked Scout through our neighborhood park, watching couples sip coffee on benches. And children race down sidewalks without worry. Fireflies blinked beneath trees as the sun dipped below rooftops. We didn't speak much, words felt unnecessary. His fingers threaded through mine, warm and steady. At one point, he looked over and asked, What's on your mind? I think I finally closed the door, I said. Not slammed. Not locked. Just closed. He nodded. Good. You deserve peace. And I wanted to stay closed. He paused, then smiled. Then we'll keep it that way. And that was the final layer, the part one hadn't realized was still missing. The understanding that choosing peace isn't passive. It's intentional. It's waking up every day and deciding not to let the ghosts back in. It's deleting the emails. It's declining the calls. It's choosing your present over your past. Again and again. Later that night, I stood in my studio, staring at a blank canvas. I pulled out brushes, picked bold reds and soft blues, and started painting. Not a person, not a place, just motion. I didn't sketch first. I didn't overthink. I let the colors collide, spill, stretch. And somewhere in that process, something shifted. Not everything had to make sense, some things just had to exist. I wasn't erasing my story. I was adding to it, and this chapter, it was mine. 3 months passed quietly, the kind of quiet I once mistook for danger. Growing up, silence meant something was about to erupt. A slammed cabinet. A sarcastic jab. The word disappointed. Used like a blade. But now, silence no longer held me hostage. It offered comfort. Stillness. Stability. My mornings began with coffee brewed while Scout circled my ankles, eager for our walks through tree-lined streets that now felt like home. Afternoons were spent immersed in client projects, designing brand identities for community health programs and shelters for young women, projects that reminded me why I started Miller Creative in the first place. Every logo, every color palette, felt like a message to the younger version of myself. You weren't invisible. You were always meant to be seen. And Brian remained my partner in every sense of the word, patient when I panicked, steady when I spiraled, and always ready with an offbeat joke that made the corners of my mouth twitch upward, even on hard days. His career as a photographer flourished too, especially after a gallery picked up his latest series capturing resilience in everyday moments: smudged handprints on a bakery window, a mother braiding her daughter's hair on the subway, a shelter dog curled at a child's feet. We often collaborated, his lens and my designs merging into visual campaigns that felt personal and impactful. One chilly morning in November, I sat curled on the living room couch, wrapped in a knit blanket, sifting through old sketchbooks I hadn't touched in years. The early pages were frantic scribbles, chaotic forms, jagged lines that spoke of confusion and pain I hadn't yet named. But as I flipped forward, something changed. Shapes softened. Faces appeared. Then colors. Bright ones. And finally, light. I paused at a page that held a familiar image, a train station pillar, drawn in fine ink strokes, and a small girl beneath it. But she wasn't afraid. She stood tall. Her fists were clenched, not in fear, but in defiance. I closed the book, tears pooling but never falling. That girl had made it out. She'd found her own way home. Later that day, I received a voicemail. From Ethan. Short. Measured. Just letting you know Dad's back home. Mom's still complicated. No pressure to reply. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He understood the silence was its own kind of answer. That weekend, Thomas and Sarah came over for dinner. We cooked together, Brian on garlic bread. Duty, Thomas commandeering the grill, Sarah and I preparing salad and catching up. It wasn't extravagant. Just 4 people, laughter bouncing between walls painted in muted sage green, Scout hovering for crumbs. But the love in that room felt like armor. Midway through dessert, Sarah leaned over, squeezing my hand gently. You seem lighter, she said softly. Less guarded. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I think I finally believe I'm safe. After they left, Brian and I sat in the backyard under string lights he'd hung last summer. Wine glasses resting on a small iron table between us. He watched me for a moment, then asked, "Would you ever want to reach out again?" I didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "No," I replied. "But I also don't feel like I'm running anymore." "That's enough." He reached for my hand and kissed the back of it. "You deserve everything good." The following week, a nonprofit I deeply admired reached out about a campaign to raise awareness for foster youth aging out of the system. They wanted a brand identity that felt hopeful without being naive. Something rooted in resilience. I accepted the project immediately. As I worked through concepts, I couldn't help but reflect on all the kids who never got their Sarah and Thomas, who were left floating between courtrooms and strangers' houses without anyone reminding them they mattered. That they weren't broken, just bruised. I poured every lesson, every wound, every moment of hard-earned healing into the work. When the campaign launched, it exceeded every metric. But more than that, it resonated. Survivors' message to say they felt seen. That someone had finally captured what it was like to rebuild from nothing. One of the campaign's slogans read, "You weren't abandoned. You were released to find something better." And that truth didn't just apply to the kids we were trying to reach, it applied to me too. For my 33rd birthday, Brian surprised me with a weekend cabin trip. Just us, Scout, and a canvas he'd hidden in the back seat of the car. "I thought you might want to paint again," he said, unloading brushes and paints. "No deadlines. No clients. Just you." So I did that. I painted the mountains outside our window. I painted Scout chasing falling leaves. I painted a little girl on a train platform, but this time, she was walking away from the pillar, not standing beneath it, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where she was going. Returning from the cabin marked a quiet shift in how I viewed everything, my past, my name, my choices. There was no dramatic transformation, just a calmness that settled into the corners of my life. Miller Creative continued to thrive, with new clients seeking campaigns that felt both thoughtful and personal. I became known not only for clean aesthetics, but for the emotional clarity my work carried. One organization director told me, "You create like someone who knows what survival feels like." She had no idea how right she was. I didn't explain. I no longer felt the need to share my backstory to validate my strength. I simply smiled, thanked her, and moved on. Quiet dignity had replaced the desperate need for recognition. My name, Megan, was no longer a shield. It had become a declaration. A reminder that identity can be reclaimed and rewritten, not just once, but continuously, through every decision that honors who you've become. Brian and I found ourselves talking more often about the idea of family, not the one I'd severed ties with, but the one we could create together. The topic of children no longer triggered panic or hesitation. Therapy had helped me understand that fear didn't have to guide parenthood. One evening, while chopping vegetables for dinner, Brian asked gently, "Do you think we're ready?" I paused, looking around our kitchen, the photos on the fridge, Scout curled at my feet, the warmth between us built over years of careful trust, and said yes, not out of impulse, but from a place of real, grounded readiness. That night, we sat on the couch discussing next steps, not rushing, not planning for perfection, just exploring what it might look like to open our hearts a little wider. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to respect every boundary I'd established. He messaged occasionally, mostly with updates about his kids or anecdotes about their newest school projects. Never about Frank. Never about Karen. He never asked for more than I was willing to give, and because of that, we were slowly building something tentative but authentic. Once, he sent a photograph of his daughter Emma's school art project, a colorful collage titled "Things That Make Me Brave." He captioned it simply, "She's teaching me more than I ever taught her." I didn't respond with words. I just hearted the message and let it sit. Then, on a breezy Sunday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Audrey, my closest friend since college, called, her voice vibrating with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "A foundation saw our joint campaign. They want to feature you in a short documentary series on women who transformed childhood trauma into public impact." My gut twisted, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen so fully. It wasn't about attention. It was about truth. "Only if I get final approval," I replied. "I want to tell it my way." She laughed. "They already know that's the deal." Filming began 2 weeks later. The crew was small, respectful, composed mostly of women. We recorded in my home studio, in the park where I walk Scout, in front of the mural downtown that I'd helped design for National Foster Awareness Month. I spoke about survival, not as a destination but a practice. About how healing doesn't mean forgetting. About how choosing to sever ties with family doesn't make you heartless, it makes you wise. The director asked if I'd ever spoken to my birth parents again after that hospital visit. I answered, Without hesitation, no. And I never will. That chapter didn't end with forgiveness, it ended with boundaries. That's a complete ending, too. When the documentary aired, I received messages from strangers across the country. Some were women who'd walked away from toxic households. Others were foster parents looking for reassurance that love could take root in hard soil. A few were adult survivors of abandonment who said they finally saw themselves reflected with dignity. I read every message, and though I couldn't respond to them all, I carried their stories with me. I understood them. Because I had once been lost, too, and now I had become a compass point. One evening, Sarah called after watching the film. Her voice was thick with emotion. "I never knew the full extent," she said softly. "You never told us everything." I smiled through tears. "I didn't need to. You loved me like you already knew." Thomas chimed in from the background, adding, "That was the strongest version of you we've ever seen. And we've seen a lot." At the end of that week, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, Karen's. I didn't open it. I didn't tear it up either. I placed it in a sealed folder labeled Unfinished Stories and slid it into the back of my desk drawer. Not because I feared its contents, but because I knew they no longer had the power to shape my life. That letter was not a bridge. It was a relic. Something belonging to a past I had outgrown. I had learned something vital. Healing isn't about reopening old wounds to prove your pain. It's about creating a life so full, so rooted in truth, that the shadows lose their grip. I had created that life. With paint. With pixels. With hard choices and sleepless nights. With chosen family. With love that asked nothing of me except to show up, day by day, as I was, and that, more than anything, was my final act of power. Winter arrived like a hush, blanketing Chicago in pale light and muffled footsteps. Snow collected along the edges of sidewalks, rooftops wore powdery crowns, and the chill in the air was no longer something I feared, it was invigorating. I stood at my studio window one morning, watching the city stretch awake beneath a soft, gray sky, and felt a strange sense of wholeness settle inside me. Not completeness in the way people write about in books, but a full-circle awareness that nothing in my life had been wasted, not the abandonment, not the silence, not even the years spent believing I was unworthy of love. Every fragment had become part of the mosaic. Every tear had watered the roots of the woman I had become. That realization didn't come with dramatic music or a tearful epiphany, it came with quiet recognition that peace isn't loud, and it rarely seeks attention. It's a soft hum that lives beneath the surface, even on days when grief knocks gently at the door. I knew now that healing had never been about erasing the past, it had always been about reclaiming the story. Megan Miller wasn't just a name I chose, it was a promise to myself. A vow to never be defined by what had been done to me, but by how I chose to live despite it. As the year ended, Brian and I took Scout on a cabin trip again, this time to the mountains in Colorado. We spent nights by the fire, sipping cocoa and tracing dreams in the frost on the windows. We talked about adoption, about writing children's books that blended his photos and my illustrations, about maybe, someday, teaching design to kids with backgrounds like mine. One afternoon, I opened the Unfinished Stories folder, the one with Karen's letter inside. I read it slowly, absorbing every word not with emotion, but with curiosity, like examining a fossil. It was riddled with apologies wrapped in excuses, phrases like, "We thought we were doing the right thing," and "You were always too sensitive." No mention of abandonment. No ownership. Just layered deflections masked as reflection. When I finished, I folded it back into the envelope and burned it in the fireplace. Not out of anger, but because some things belong to ash. That night, as snow blanketed the mountains around us, I held Brian's hand and whispered, "I'm done carrying it." He squeezed my fingers, his voice soft. "Then let it go." And I did. Truly. Finally. Not to forget, but to free myself. I returned home lighter. Not empty, just no longer burdened. The documentary had been nominated for a regional award. Miller Creative had signed 2 major campaigns. I'd enrolled in a mentorship program for young women aging out of the foster system. Life was still complex, still unpredictable, but no longer something I survived. It had become something I authored. On the first day of spring, I hosted a small exhibit at a local gallery, my first solo show. The final painting in the series was of a young girl stepping off a train platform, not looking back. Beneath it, a plaque read, "She was never lost. She was on her way." And in that room, surrounded by people who loved me, not for what I'd endured, but for who I'd become, I understood something deeper than revenge. I had outgrown the need for validation from those who couldn't see me. I had built a life so radiant, even the darkness could no longer follow. I had become my own rescue.